We are in session 3 of 4 sessions. Just next week we'll look at some stuff from the New Testament, look at Jesus and the land. First 3 is much more focused on the Hebrew Bible. And up to now, these are the sort of main themes, I think, which we've been talking about. The first is, a kind of fundamental that creation is good. In Genesis, the creation is made and it is good. And then the assertion in Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. I mean, that is kind of fundamental to everything that when we think about the land, that it is not human's possession, it is God's, and it's on loan, it's an inheritance from God, a gift from God. And humanity itself is of the earth, dust to dust. Adam means earth, and in the Bible it says, of dust you are made, and to dust you will return. So humanity is a creation of the earth itself, and our a symbiotic relationship with the earth is real. The food we eat comes from the earth, and the people we are is, you are who you eat, as they say. And that in the Bible, the land of Israel is seen as a gift to the Hebrew people. But there are conditions on that. The condition is justice. We looked at the passage in Isaiah chapter 5 with the vineyard. Israel is a vineyard, and God was looking for justice, but he found bloodshed. And the idea there that the land is sacred, inherited. I mean, we looked at the story of Naboth's vineyard, and now Ahab and Jezebel stole that property from Nathan, and that was condemned by the prophet. And the crime was that they'd really taken Naboth's inherited ownership of the land that was sacred to him and his clan. And then last week we looked at the occupation, the possession of Israel by the Hebrews after their 40 years in the wilderness, and we saw a really complex picture of a conquest by violence, in some areas by coexistence, in some ways, some places subjecting the people into forced labor, and there was this problem, of the competing deities. And we sort of saw that by the end that there was a really complex picture emerging in Judah and Israel in that time, as a result of the conquest, and one that was going to work itself through in the history of Israel. And this week we try and look at the sort of interconnectedness of the land, God, and the people, and how the story unfolds from the conquest. Now, I put some questions to be at the back of our minds, which I think we'll come to at the end, and just ask these questions. But I thought I'd put them there at the beginning, then as we're going along, you might remember them. What does this mean for our devastated land? I mean, if we're looking now at a land, an earth that has been devastated because of environmental degradation, what is the story of Israel's relationship with the land tell us? And then second question, is renewal possible through connecting the political, the practical, and the divine, bringing together the practical solutions for climate change, the political will, and this relationship with God, which was so fundamental, God the Creator, which was so fundamental in the Hebrew story. And then I've just put in, where does the God of history fit into the earth's renewal? Because I think we've been talking about the God of creation, the Creator God, and we've talked, I think, a lot here and in other places about how nature renews itself and how the work of God is visible in the capacity of nature to renew itself. But today, I think we'll be looking more about how we understand God as an actor in history, as well as an actor in nature. But how does God, who acts in history, fit into the story, the potential story for Earth's renewal today? Okay. So let me just put this little quote up, because it's from theologian Walter Brueggemann. Biblical faith is the pursuit of historical belonging, which includes a sense of destiny derived from such belonging. And I think we saw that last week, that sense of historical belonging, a sense of a historical relationship between the Hebrews and the land of Israel, the Jews and the land of Israel, that sense of belonging. And other people will have a sense of historical belonging to their own spaces. And that includes a sense of destiny. So more than just saying this is ours, you know, that in the Bible, Israel is given to the people for a purpose, for a destiny, for a purpose. But that purpose comes in a sense from that sense of belonging. And also put there the three things I've mentioned in previous meetings from Walter Brueggemann, that the story of the Bible is a story of land promised, land lost, and land restored. Is that a good starting point? Yeah, good. Okay, so let's look at the Bible then. Neil has joined us. Hello, Neil. Yeah. No, it's that one. Okay, let me just put this in. Joshua 8, 30 to 35. And this is, you know, Joshua when he just enters into the promised land after Moses has died, and they've crossed the Jordan and they're doing all their stuff. Would somebody like to read it?
I'd love to.
I thought you would.
I've had my camera off. I've got dinner. Anyhow, here we go. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. As it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of unhewn stones on which no iron tool has been used. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed offerings of well-being. And there in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. All Israel, alien as well as citizen, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on opposite sides of the ark in front of the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded at the first. They should bless the people of Israel. And afterwards he read all the words of the law, blessings and curses, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women, the little ones, and the aliens who resided among them.
Okay, what strikes you in that? Anything that comes out?
Me personally? Or...
Yeah, everybody, anybody.
Must have gone on for a very long time if they've read all of the law. That's
Yeah.
a lot of material to read.
Yeah, I'm guessing it was Deuteronomy because of the blessings and the curses. They read all the words of the law. Maybe it was all of them. They've been in there a long time. Not a word that Moses commanded, Joshua did not read. And the women and the little ones and the aliens who resided among them. Who those aliens were, I'm not sure, because remember that it wasn't only the Hebrews who came out of Egypt. A lot of other people came out as well, who were also slaves. But there's something in there. I mean, basically what we're seeing here is a kind of a renewal and an assertion of the covenant, the law itself, at the very start of their life in Israel. That this right at the very start, and the possession of the land is blessed, if you like, or sanctified by the law. I don't know if you've been to a synagogue worship, where they touch the Torah as they process the scroll around the congregation, and they kiss, not actually touch it, but they kiss the law. It's a relationship to those words that is crucial, and what we're seeing here is that is also kind of inseparable from the possession, this belonging, this being in Israel itself. Does that make sense? Yep. Is that a yes?
Yeah, I was just looking at what comes before this, and
okay.
Am I stealing your thunder, Vaughan?
No, you're not. No, go ahead.
Okay, because it's completely horrific in the way that they completely wipe out all the people of the land who've been there before them, and no one is allowed to survive, and then the king is hung from a tree, he's buried at the town gateway under a great heap of stones.
Yeah.
So there's been a complete, well, on one level, it's been a complete purification of the land, hasn't it? But it's a brutal one.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I can't really go much further than that with this. But I'm wondering if there's a significance to Mount Ebal, whether that's a particularly significant mountain, or whether that's just the entrance to the land that they're moving into, or what.
Gerizim and Mount Ebal, I mean, I think they must be quite a long way away from each other. I mean, but they were the sacred sites, weren't they, before Jerusalem became the center. I think I'm right there, aren't I? Anybody know better than me? Yeah. I mean, they were kind of the sacred site, and Gerizim, I think, is in the north. So they're quite a long way away from each other. So it's a kind of symbolic ownership of the whole space, and actually ensuring that this space is covered, if you like, by the covenant itself, and this covenant relationship, that we read about in the law, is kind of used to sanctify this space, this land of Israel. So covenant really matters. I'm going back to.
Just going to let the dog out. Won't be a sec.
I have a question. I don't know, Vaughn,
sure.
if you're moving on to another.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm curious about the aliens, because it says up in verse 33, alien as well as citizen, and then later at the very end, aliens who resided among them. And I don't know if I'm reading too much into it or what, but I guess particularly in light of what Neil was just saying of what comes right before this, who do we think the aliens are? Like, I feel like because they say aliens as well as citizen, that implies to me that they wouldn't be on the same standing or be equals with the Israelites. But then at the end, it says aliens who resided among them, not aliens who are slaves or something. So who do we think these people are? And do we know anything about what their relationship with the covenant would have been? Are they just forced to listen to it? Or, would they have been participants?
No, I mean, again, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they would be people who would be literally residing with the Hebrews. They would be friends rather than enemies. I mean, I think you've got this sense of, I mean, as Neil just pointed out, I mean, you've got these people who are being massacred and murdered all around them. But if you go back into the story of the Exodus, when the Hebrew slaves came out of Egypt, it wasn't only the Hebrews who came out. There were a lot of other slaves who came with them and journeyed with them. And from people, I mean, we assume, I think, from different parts of Africa, who've been taken into slavery by the Egyptians, as the Hebrews had. And so when this revolt took place and they left, lots of other people came along with them. So and it's only 40 years they were in the wilderness, so those people must have still been there, and in some kind of friendly relationship with them.
In Leviticus 19, it says, when an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as a citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you are aliens in the land of Egypt.
So is there a distinction then between those who've been living with Israel and part of the community and have in some way traveled with them, and those who are in the land that they're going in to possess? And how is that distinction working? Because in a sense, you could say, well, it takes away choice from those whose land they're moving into. They don't get the chance to be friendly citizens, at least with Israel, and that, that's difficult.
There's a contradiction there, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely there's a contradiction, and we know from the story of Ruth, that Ruth was not a Hebrew, and she was allowed to glean the corn from the edge of the field, because that was reserved for aliens and strangers and so on. So there's a kind of contradictory tradition here. You've got this story of the aliens who are treated well, and these people who they've conquered who are not treated well, and there must be some kind of something to do with their religious practice as well, which would sort of determine that, because the people they conquered were the people who had this worship of idols that was abhorrent to them. But that
is it significant then that Ruth is part of Jesus's ancestry?
Very much so.
As are other aliens.
Yeah.
And therefore is this the old way, and therefore one that Jesus has superseded or built? I mean, I always find it difficult to know whether Jesus has overturned or built upon what's come before. In some ways, it seems like that might suggest he's not in favor of us continuing to slaughter people whose land we're going in to take.
It's not unreasonable to assume that.
I thought it might be.
I mean, there's a fundamental ambiguity in the narrative as we were saying last week, as whether they did march in and kill everybody, or whether they just assimilated the residents among themselves. And I think that's probably reflected here, that we don't really know enough, and different narratives are, in a sense, addressing different situations. So the Leviticus law is addressing a situation where they are living together, whereas some of the other narratives assume a rather different scenario, and it may be that the truth is somewhere between the two. I know there's a scholarly debate about the occupation and whether it was all or nothing, or whether it was
Mm.
coexistence.
Yeah.
Um,
And over what period of time it
yeah,
took as
Yeah.
well, you know, because
yes,
you know, I think, as we said last week, these are chronicles that are written and edited much later. So
Yeah.
let me
and with
just-
a message, they're not intended to be literal history. They're written with a message. So in a
Yeah.
sense, it's
Yeah.
you have to think about the time they were written and what they were intended to be saying to the people at the time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um,
And the modern concept of history can't be applied here. It's not
Yeah.
about an accurate record of what happened, where and when. Yeah. What are we up to? Let's just look at these little verses now from Leviticus. Just as I said, the earth is the Lord's, and Leviticus says, "The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. With me you are but aliens and tenants." So they weren't actually allowed to sell the land forever. I mean, no one was allowed to possess and own land in perpetuity. You know, you have the Jubilee, which, you know, 50 years, you know, it's in Leviticus 25, the land has to be returned. And again, in Leviticus 27, all tithes from the land, whether the seed from the ground or the fruit from the tree, are the Lord's. They are holy to the Lord. And these are, so, you know, this is sacredness about Israel. If persons wish to redeem any of their tithes, they must add 1/5 to them. All tithes of herd and flock, every 10th one that passes under the shepherd's staff, shall be holy to the Lord. Let no one inquire whether it is good or bad, or make substitution for it. Or if one makes substitution for it, then both it and the substitute shall be holy and cannot be redeemed. So there you go. Just these kind of rules about, you know, the tithing, you know, giving a proportion of the land to be given to God through the temple system. Yeah, and that just reinforces, you know, the idea that the land is belonging to God, and Israel particularly is holy, and the people are in that relationship, symbiotic relationship with God, the land, the fruit of the land, so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a rather difficult thing here, because, you know, it's saying that the land is the Lord's, and then it's saying that because you know, the people of Israel have a special relationship with God, then they have they have a special relationship with the land. But and you know, the other people in the land, I mean, you know, the original inhabitants, or the people who have, you know, you know, who were on the land during the exile, they don't have such a special relationship with God, and therefore they don't have the land. But what about all the other people who, I mean, do they have a relationship with God? And you know, where do they get their land from? And I think, you know, I think it is just, and also, you know, furthermore, when you know, Judaism turns into Christianity, and Christianity is supposed to be for everybody in the world. Well, what happens to these, you know, this stuff about land possession? I mean, does land still have its you know, the special relationship with the people of Israel?
Yeah, well, I think that's the question we'll look at next week, because that's the New Testament question, and what happens then. I mean, we can perhaps spend more time on that next week. But I think here the question is, I think, a very valid one. You know, other people have relationship with other pieces of land, you know, and does that just by chance, or is that also divinely ordained, you know, for other peoples? And if it is, then that creates all kinds of problems for people who want to move from one land to another, and it creates all kinds of problems for the people of Ukraine if Putin is saying that God has ordained Ukraine to be part of Russia and so on, you know. And they're genuine political problems today. People make that claim.
Yes, and ethnicities generally don't have tidy borders.
No, it's true. Now, just moving on to look at, you know, we talked about land promised, and we've just looked about, you know, that relationship of the land promised and people there. But now the second part of this is the land lost, Brueggemann talks about. And here's a little passage from Deuteronomy, early in Deuteronomy, which is a prophecy already to Moses. When you've had children and children's children and become complacent in the land, if you act corruptly by making an idol in form of anything, thus doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God and provoking him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. You will not live long on it, but it will be utterly destroyed. The Lord will scatter you amongst the peoples. Only a few of you will be left among the nations where the Lord will lead you. So that last sentence, the Lord will scatter you among the peoples. Only a few of you will be left among the nations where the Lord will lead you. It's quite an ominous kind of statement. The word diaspora means a scattering. And that is extremely significant for, you know, the history of the Jews, you know, the diaspora Jews.
Again, I think it's important to be aware that most scholars think that Deuteronomy and Joshua Judges was written after the exile, so it's written after these things had happened. So it's not saying they're going to happen, but it's trying to understand why they happened.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is definitely a writing of history, and as we said last week, to kind of justify and explain and describe what was going on within history, with the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah.
And you just some more from Deuteronomy, which I think is really interesting. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you must not learn to imitate the abhorrent practices of those nations. No one shall be found among you who makes a son or daughter pass through fire, or who practices divination, or is a soothsayer, or an augur, or a sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or who consults ghosts or spirits, who seeks oracles from the dead. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord. It is because of such abhorrent practices that the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You must remain completely loyal to the Lord your God. Although these nations that you're about to dispossess do give heed to soothsayers and diviners, as for you, the Lord your God does not permit you to do so. So this is quite a strong prophetic, you know, statement here. You must not take to the prophet. And then the promise that in Deuteronomy, which becomes very significant, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people, a prophet like Moses. You shall heed such a prophet. So, you know, there's a sense in which the kind of, you know, the possibilities there of the people of Israel actually following the wrong path. And as we know in other parts of the Bible, you know, the failure of political leadership all the time in Israel. But the role of the prophet stands out as being being highly, highly significant.
Mm.
And you know, that becomes that little verse there, the Lord God will raise up a prophet from me, you know, is very important, you know, in terms of, was Jesus that prophet? You know, I mean, I think that people were, part of the expectation at the time of Jesus that such a prophet would appear. Sounds like they had fun there before the Israelites arrived. Let's look at some little bits from Ezekiel.
I mean, so it's certainly true that some of the practices of other faiths at that time were pretty abhorrent.
Mm.
So,
Oh, yeah.
there's a justification in that sense.
Very much so, I think. And, you know, I mean, things like child sacrifices and so on, I mean, they were there. Let's just look at some of the stuff from Ezekiel. So now again, you know, this little little story that Ezekiel is telling us is the time of the exile. I will make the land a desolation and a waste, and its proud and its proud might shall come to an end, and the mountains of Israel shall be so desolate that no one would pass through. I kind of, you know, want to kind of link that to the contemporary situation in the land, you know, where we are now. I mean, it's very localized, very particular to them, you know, that this calamity would fall upon Israel, as it did. But it's a kind of, that's a description, isn't it, of the kind of world that we're in now. And in chapter 10 of Ezekiel, you know, we read how God actually leads. It isn't just the people who are carried out into exile, but God leads. You know, there's this vision in Ezekiel of, you know, these whirling chariots and cherubims and all the rest of it in a dream that Ezekiel has. And he actually sees the glory of God lifting out of the temple, you know, into these chariots in the sky. That it isn't just the people that are going, it's actually the presence of God which leaves Israel as well. I mean, the exile is not just a physical exile, you know, a group of refugees having to flee a country that's been invaded, you know, or a group of people who have been captured and taken away. It's actually God who goes as well. I mean, it's such a separation from the covenant and, you know, that relationship of Israel to the land, which is really quite terrifying, I think. You know, it must have been terrifying for Ezekiel to think in those terms. But I think his point was that the people believed that the temple was indestructible because of God's presence, you know, and Ezekiel is, you know, saying, look, no, you know, this is not a permanent arrangement here, you know. It's all conditional, and this ownership, this possession, this sacred relationship between you and the land can be broken if you don't follow these kind of ways. Yeah. But good news follows. Harley, just read it. Can you?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
So here we go.
Here we go.
Thus says the Lord God, on the day that I cleanse you from all your iniquities, I will cause the towns to be inhabited, and the waste places shall be rebuilt. The land that was desolate shall be tilled, instead of being the desolation that it was in the sight of all who passed by. And they will say, the land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and desolate and ruined towns are now inhabited and fortified. Then the nations that are left all around you shall know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt the ruined places, and replanted that which was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it.
Some good news. What can you pull anything out there that you think is important?
I'm just thinking that the opposite of desolation is land that can be put to use. Again, I'm trying to find a different way of saying it, but it's you know, they can till it and it can be garden, and they can build towns. So the kind of idea of desolation is land that is not part of the process of living, I suppose, their lives. I mean, land that can't be used for people seems abhorrent, which is interesting.
I mean, I think the idea of tilling the land there is
Yes.
is important. I mean, who was it who tilled the land? You know, who first tilled the land? What was? Well,
Presumably, was it Adam?
Adam, yeah, yeah. That was what it was created
I suppose
for.
it would be.
Yeah. That was a job that he was given, you know, to look after the garden.
Okay.
And then it mentions the next verse, and they will say, "The land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden." So you're actually not just, again, he's not just talking about the land, you know, the people coming back, and that's a nice thing to have happened. You know, I mean, they were out in exile and then they came home again. Because I don't think it was quite like that, you know. I mean, it's, you know, people had the freedom to come back, but a lot of people didn't, you know. I mean, and a lot of people had already scattered diaspora. They've been scattered to other parts of Africa and to whatever the Middle East should be called. But this is more about the recovery of the sacredness of the land. You know, it's about the recreation. That new creation beginning again.
But the thing that makes me uncomfortable about this is that the land has no purpose or right to exist without humans being able to use it. And that's part of our problem now, isn't it? That's how we view the earth, that if we can't use it, well, what's the point in it?
That's the debate, you know, is the sense in the Bible of our humanity being stewards of the land.
Yeah.
You know, is that a blessing or a curse? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the Bible clearly has a kind of anthropocentric, you know, is it anthropocentric? You know, I mean, a human at the center kind of understanding of creation. And, you know, I mean, that some is seen as being deeply problematic. But I'm sort of halfway between the two, really. I mean, I think, you know, humanity has got a relationship, you know, to creation and is part of it and integral to it, you know, but, you know, has certain qualities that mean that, you know, we also have a particular responsibility. I mean, I don't know.
I think it's also significant that it's talking about a nation. So it's saying, I'll cause the towns to be inhabited. So it's in a sense a land in the sense of a country. is being revivified. And I do think it's important, the bit where it says they will say, because I think this seems to be about the renewal of Israel, the land, whatever, as being a witness to God's activity. I think that's how they're seeing it, that in the future that there'll be this land restored, and that will be a witness to God's action in history.
I mean,
I'm not sure necessarily that in their minds would have been the question of the status of the land, whether it's ours or God's, and whether it can exist without us.
No,
It's a question for us, but
yeah.
I'm not sure it was for them.
And there are some, some rather scary prophecies saying that, all of the land will become habitable. And there won't be any hills or valleys anymore. It's going to be an extremely boring land.
I don't think that's literal.
There'll be people entirely full of people, presumably working like crazy to
and everything. You could see how it could be a justification, couldn't you?
Yeah.
But I guess the balance is, I was just trying to think in my head, where is creation praised as being just creation, and then there's the bits in Job, where God says, "Were you there when?" and all the stuff he talks about there, and there's all the Psalms as well that talk about creation praising God. So there is purpose given to creation without it having to be subject to man flattening it or tilling it or whatever.
Absolutely.
There is a balance.
Yeah, and like all the components of creation have got, a role in the praise of God. That all creation is praising God. I mean, that's really what. I mean, I think there's something there about you see in Isaiah as well. The role of Israel is to be the witness, as I think Peter just said, didn't you? Be the witness to the nations around, that God. So it isn't Israel isn't there just to have God for themselves. Israel is the means by which God reveals Himself to the nations. And the nations that are left around shall know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt the place. It isn't the people themselves, who've rebuilt these places, have come back to their homes, and they've opened them up, and they've got the fields, and they've got the agriculture going again, the economy working, and all the rest of it. But it isn't them who've done it. God has enabled that to happen. God is working in the history to make that happen. Yeah, just showing 47 through this Katrine. This is another one for you. In a sense that Ezekiel seems to be saying that things are going to be different when you come back. You shall allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and for the aliens who reside among you and have begotten children among you. They shall be to you as citizens of Israel. With you they shall be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So there does seem to be a shifting the relationship between the people around them. Although we won't go into the book of Ezra and other ones where it's not quite so cut and dried. Are we doing for time? Very, very briefly, let's just have a quick look at Isaiah, then we'll ask those questions that I asked at the start. This is this is a very kind of Christmassy reading, but turns out it's not about Christmas. The idea of the second exile, Exodus rather, the second Exodus, that after the exile, then the people of Israel come back. And this is another Exodus. This is a return. Can you see that all of it? Yeah, because I've got a thing at the bottom. Oh, yeah, there it is. Somebody you like to read this?
I have a go.
Thank you.
But there will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in a latter time he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onwards and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. The Lord sent a word against Jacob, and it fell on Israel, and all the people knew it, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria. But in pride and arrogance of heart, sorry.
No, I think I've gone a bit too far. I mean,
Okay, sorry.
Just to verse 7, yeah, I think I meant.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's my mistake. So yeah, I mean, that's very kind of familiar, but it's just about this kind of, restoration of land, and the renewal and the multiplication, the increasing of the joy of the people, the harvest, the yoke of their burden, the bar of their shoulders being lifted up. Yeah, and we don't know who the child is that's going to be born. But there it is. Just a different, possibility of restoration there. Let me go back to. Okay. Just let me go back to the questions which I kind of posed at the start. The shared window is closed. Okay, I don't know what happened there. I must have closed the thing before I intended it to happen. Yeah, so I mean, in the light of those kind of Bible passages, I just wonder what we think about these questions. Does this, the fact that the Bible sees the devastation of land by, in this case, really by political interference, the devastation of the land, does that, as God's action, does that have any kind of import into the degradation of land in our generation? And then is the way in which the renewal of Israel after that devastation was really political. It was about the movement of the Babylonians and the Jews, and it was practical. It was about coming home. It was about rebuilding land and so on. But it was also about that interconnectedness with God and God who was working within that. And this, God of history, does the God of history fit into the story of the earth's renewal? And does that God of history fit into our time and our story of renewal? Or is that just ancient? And do we, when we think of God and land, God and creation, do we have to think more than the God who is at work within the sap of the trees and making the grass grow and the sun shine, and who the creator God is doing? Do we also see God in these movements of history, including movements for the renewal of the earth? God at work in the people who are trying to save the planet from horrific destruction. Are they silly questions, or
I think, to put it another way, there's some metaphor that I find helpful, the idea that the world is God's body. And although one can't take that literally as a metaphor, it means that God suffers when the earth suffers. And I think there's something very profound there about them, our imperative to address the suffering of the earth. And that is a divine imperative too. Because God suffers when the created order suffers, whether it's human or whether it's non-human. God suffers because of that.
Because God is creator.
Yeah.
And God's creation. God is an artist.
Yes.
You know, it's like a painter watching the canvas being destroyed.
Yeah. I don't know if this is reading too much into it, but you know, so when Israel wipes out other nations that have been on the land before, they're often nations that have been doing fairly appalling things. And although I don't think we get this anywhere directly said, but an implicit meaning, building on Peter's point, if God's body suffers when people do abhorrent things on it, then, and he can't bear it, and it can't be, you know, can't abide with it, then something has to be done about those practices. And if we, you know, in a different way, are continuing to cause devastation, then there's a kind of a warning here for us. It's not so much that he hates the people, it's just that this can't go on. And I wonder if that's reading too much into it, whether that's adding too tangential a thought. I don't know, but just occurs to me.
I can see sense in what you're saying.
It's not particularly comfortable, is it?
even just on the level that actions have consequences.
Yeah.
And that's an important point in the Old Testament too, that actions have consequences.
But I wonder too, I mean, I think you could say, I mean, we know that there are abhorrent practices in our contemporary world, which aren't the same as the abhorrent practices of, you know, the Canaanites or whatever. But, you know, illegal logging or, putting chemicals into rivers and plastic into oceans, you know, I mean, these are pretty abhorrent practices. But I wonder, the prophetic word is a word of judgment and condemnation. But it's also, as we saw in Ezekiel, and in Isaiah, it's also a promise of restoration and renewal and recreation. And to what extent, you know, our job, you know, the prophetic task of church and prophetic, you know, voices in the world, you know, is to say these things, terrible things are happening, but you know, the possibility of restoration is there, the possibility of renewal is there. And the question I keep coming back to all the time in this is, can humanity reach that point, you know, where it can restore the planet without, you know, an understanding of Creator God? You know, is the secular, nihilistic, you know, Nietzschean kind of world where God is dead, capable of renewing in the way, you know, that the prophet, you know, in ancient Israel had the sense to say, renewal will come, but you won't do it. You know, so do we need to say renewal will come? We can't do it. We've got to find, first of all, that relationship with the Creator God, and then allow that relationship to renew. And a lot of that will be practical. You know, a lot of that will be scientists discovering, you know, new ways of food production and ways of harnessing energy from the waves, and all of those kind of things. A lot of it will be that, but it's also about having a fundamental belief, in the realm of God, in the kingdom of God, and the Creator God, which has to undergird that and be part of that. Or am I talking nonsense? So when I say these
I
things,
don't think so.
that sounds good. I think
But I think it's chicken and egg here, isn't it? We kind of, you can think on the one hand, okay, everybody needs to suddenly have a faith, and then they'll understand how to use the world, or how the world should be, and that doesn't work because there are plenty of Christians who are part of the devastation as well. It can work, but I think there's also a sense of, if you get your hands dirty and start getting involved in creation and grow a plant, for example, and start to see wonderful things happening in nature, how can you not start to connect with the source which provides the life? I think it has to be both and.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, just seeing that, knowing that, being in touch with it, nature is to be in touch with the Creator, and being in touch with the Creator gives a love of creation, and the love of creation gives the renewal of creation. Yeah.
And to go off on a wild lateral thought, taking Peter's idea, then isn't that a bit like Thomas putting his hand in Jesus's side? I can believe now.
Does that merit being the last statement? That's really good. I mean, we reached our time, and next week we'll look at the New Testament stuff, and Graham, and see what happens, where Jesus fits into this story.